Hello, everyone. The article we are going to talk about is A Room of One's Own, The Meaning of Spatial Autonomy for Unmarried Women in Neoliberal South Korea by Jisuk Sung. Introducing the author. To begin with, the article was written by Jisuk Sung. She is a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Toronto, specifically the St. George campus. She also serves as department chair and graduate chair. Additionally, she carries a BA in Education Science and a PhD in Cultural Anthropology, with a minor degree in Women's Studies. Currently, she focuses her time mainly on research and writing a book. Her main area of interest is on homelessness, youth unemployment, single women's housing, and psychological health support system. She is also known for her other publications and is recognized for her major grants and awards. One of her publications includes her book, Living on Your Own, Single Women Rent Housing, Post-Revolutionary Effect on Contemporary South Korea. This reading is an ethnographic study of a young single woman seeking to live independently in South Korea. Moving on, this focus on single women's housing and independence will primarily provide the framework for this article's analysis. Summary of the article. The article focuses on the experiences of independent single women in South Korea, who fall in the age category of late 20s to late 30s. These women's common goal is trying to sustain a living environment where they are able to live on their own independence, where they have a space to call their own. Specifically, it showcases how these women live and lead their life under neoliberalism, which is a system that expects you to have certain skills, such as managing yourself in finances, being independent, and using your skills to maintain a job. Moreover, the article also explores the struggles and challenges women face when they try to live and be independent. There are certain expectations that are emphasized in South Korea when it comes to gender and family. This traditional challenge includes women being pressured to marry and live with their families. But even through societal pressures, single women yearn for their own space and independence where they lead their life and make personal choices that benefit themselves. Their independence involves managing themselves and finances, maintaining a job, and pushing through societal norms that favor marriage, showcasing that an individual's freedom is shaped by both feminist principles and the expectations of a neoliberal society. Therefore, the article shows that independence for these women is also shaped by societal expectation, feminist values, and economic pressures.
Song's argument centers around the tension between feminist resistance and the neoliberal culture of South Korea. She challenges the assumption that spatial autonomy for unmarried women is simply an achievement of freedom. While living independently does allow women to resist patriarchal family structures and marriage-centered norms, Song argues that this same autonomy becomes integrated into neoliberal forms of governance that value self-sufficiency and individual responsibility. In other words, women who want to live independently are simultaneously disrupting and reinforcing the power structures. One of the main points of Song's analysis is from a Foucauldian perspective, where she claims that spatial autonomy acts as a technology of the self. Through this lens, independence is not just about having your own physical space, but about producing a certain type of subject where women are responsible for managing their own risks, finances, and futures without relying on the state or collective support. From this, we can see that neoliberalism does not eliminate patriarchal constraints. Instead, it reframes them by placing feminist ideas such as autonomy and freedom into moral expectations that are then placed on individuals. Women are encouraged to see independence as a personal responsibility rather than a structural issue that is shaped by housing policies, unstable labor markets, and gender discrimination. Another central idea in the article is that neoliberalism primarily acts through desire. Song argues that women come to want independence in ways that align with the neoliberal market. Achieving spatial autonomy becomes intertwined with practices of self-auditing, such as financial planning, productivity scheduling, and constant self-improvement. These practices are not directly set by the state, but are taken up voluntarily, making neoliberal governance harder to identify and resist. This is seen through the way informants engage with self-help culture and financial management tools as a way to secure their future, even when these tools offer little real security. Despite all of this, Song does not deny that spatial autonomy has the potential to provide freedom. Instead, she emphasizes its ambiguity. On one hand, living alone allows women to escape parental surveillance, resist marriage pressures, and gain personal freedom in a society structured around heterosexual family norms. On the other hand, this freedom is conditional. It is only socially accepted when women demonstrate that they are self-reliant, employable, and non-burdensome. Independence becomes valuable, not because it challenges inequality, but because it creates subjects who require minimal social support. Overall, Song's argument challenges the assumption that autonomy and independence are inherently progressive. By understanding how spatial autonomy is integrated into neoliberal society, it is clear to see how feminist goals can be depoliticized and redirected towards market-oriented subject formation. The article encourages us to rethink what resistance looks like under neoliberalism and to question whether individual empowerment can meaningfully address structural inequality, especially when it is framed through the language of self-responsibility rather than collective change.
Key details: economic pressure and women's independence. One important detail talked about in the article is how South Korea's economy pushed single women to become independent and manage their own lives. The article explains on neoliberal economic changes, particularly the 1997 to 2003 Asian debt crisis, made daily life even harder in South Korea. This crisis made it harder to find jobs and forced people to survive by depending on themselves. This made it harder for single women, as they were forced to manage their house, income, and many more all by themselves. The article goes on to point that under neoliberalism, women are encouraged to manage and plan every aspect of their lives. Tools like Franklin planners and self-help books are presented as ways to help women manage their daily lives. The article uses women as examples, including Miss Lee, who uses a planner to organize her life, and Miss O, who feels pressured and undervalued when she cannot meet the expectations. A key takeaway from this article is that even though independence is valued, it also results in pressure and stress, making women feel responsible when they struggle in their lives. Key details continued. Barriers to women living independently. The article explains the unfair treatment single women receive when it comes to housing and loan systems. It can be seen that many banks and housing programs focus on helping married couples, which makes it hard for a single woman to purchase a house independently. An example from the article is unmarried women under 35 years are not allowed to apply for a yearly lease loan. These restrictions force women to borrow money from people, which disrupts their ability to live independently. Therefore, a woman's independence is limited by the country's systems that prioritize married couples. Another important detail is the cultural pressure and stigma women face after moving out. When a single woman decides to live independently, it comes along with negative commentary and views from other people. Some women are often labeled immature, assumed to be lesbian, and abnormal just because they are living alone. Overall, these examples show how cultural and societal expectations in South Korea remain a barrier to a woman's independence, even when they're trying to live on their own.
Song's argument is supported by her ethnographic research method, where she interviews single women in their late 20s to 30s, all of whom are navigating the housing market and social pressures. The common narrative suggests that living alone is a sign of maturity and competency, especially when compared to women who are still dependent on their family or the state. Several informants describe using the topic of self-sufficiency to defend themselves against stigma, harassment, or marginalization. By presenting themselves as capable, independent subjects, they gain a form of legitimacy. The author's argument is further supported by her examination of the structural conditions that make spatial autonomy both difficult and morally loaded. Housing and loan lending systems in South Korea explicitly privilege married households, which prevents unmarried women from accessing financial resources. Rather than interpreting this exclusion as systemic discrimination, neoliberal discourse reframes housing insecurity as a personal challenge to be overcome through better planning and discipline. As a result, women often internalize this logic, blaming themselves for instability rather than questioning the system that restricts their options. Song strengthens her analysis by placing these individual experiences in the context of broader political and economic shifts following the Asian debt crisis. Neoliberal reforms intensify labor insecurities while decreasing welfare supports, making self-sufficiency a survival strategy rather than a choice. In this context, spatial autonomy becomes an asset in the neoliberal economy, signaling adaptability and resilience. Consequently, women's independence is celebrated because it aligns with a system that offloads risk onto individuals.
In this slide, it discusses the connections and similarities between previous articles. The chosen article is The Personal is Political, The Abolition of Family Head System by Sung Kyung Kim and Kyung Hee Kim. Upon further research, they are both deeply governed by political views and systems. It shows that women in both articles displays difficulties and limitations in capabilities due to political systems. Second is the attempt to acquire individualism and freedom of choice. This shows the complexity of women being enabled to gain spatial autonomy. Additionally, it focuses on the daily experiences of women, such as revolving the experiences of marriage, housework, and sexuality. Women are expected to follow through due to the centralized traditions within Korean households. Likewise, another example would be is family and its customary traditions. Both articles display how traditions between households reveal how it's being politically organized, such as acquiring an independent living space be centralized by heterosexual marriage and the hierarchy in a family head system. And lastly, gender authority. In terms of spatial autonomy and patriarchy inside households, both articles demonstrate the dominance of men over women, demonstrating that men have more freedom to pursue their own independence and have greater access to resources like the labor market. Moving on to the discussion questions. 3 questions are conducted to acquire different perspective from the class. The first question being, how does an unmarried woman's attempt to acquire spatial autonomy challenge the neoliberal traditions in South Korea? Second is, can the vulnerability of unmarried women still be attributed to spatial autonomy? If yes, give instances of other difficulties they might encounter. And lastly, how does gender and social status affect the accessibility of unmarried women to spatial independence? As for a conclusion, I have listed below some few takeaways from this article. The first point being South Korea's rapid modernization over the last century depicts the neoliberalization of the country. Up next is after the movement in 1987 and after the electoral democracy was settled, leading to the end of the 3-decade-long military dictatorship. Furthermore, this movement displays South Korea's expansion of civil movements for women's rights, sexual identities, environmental issues, and economic justice. Next is liberalism. Liberalism was previously viewed negatively, however, it was further assessed as a positive connotation. Foucault's notion of liberal governmentality. Foucault described liberalization as an encouragement and course to improvement rather than going by threats. This governmentality inspires one to care for oneself. And lastly, spatial independence as a neoliberal human capital. The spatial independence was altered from being an anti-establishment marker to being a sign of a neoliberal human capital. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening to our presentation.